And this is the thing I want to talk about. Lots of people have talked about the protests and lots of people have talked about the statues. But it's the politicians that give these people cover that I want to talk about. You could write them off as a fringe, as a minority, but they get power. Perfect example of the David Shoebridges of this world, who demand accountability for everyone apart from the people who work for him, is what's happening in the United States. This no-cop zone that we told you about first last week. This is the protesters who took over a police station and the surrounding 6 city blocks in Seattle. This is what we were told at the time from a reporter on the ground in Seattle.
It's looking like an occupation. They look like they're there for the long haul. We see lots of tents. We see people who have set up like a food co-op where people are bringing in food and passing it out to people. It does look like they're in there for the long haul. They're talking about being in there for the long haul. They have a presence there 24 hours. And we don't really know how this is going to end. I mean, Seattle police say that they do eventually want to go back into that precinct, but honestly, they haven't said how or when. We have reached out to the mayor's office, and they have not responded to our questions about how this thing ends. So more occupation than protest right now. Certainly a lot of speeches, and they're still rallying for Black Lives Matter, but it does get the feel now of something that is more than a protest and more like an occupation.
Now, a Shoebridge-esque fringe voice, speaking on the behalf of the trots and all the rest of it that have been doing what they have been doing, both in the United States, the UK and here for the past few weeks, is this lady. This lady is a Seattle councillor. She is a socialist. And she says that our movement needs to urgently ensure that the East Precinct is not handed back to police, but turned over permanently to community control. So she is fine with territory in her own city being taken over, being completely lawless, and she's even going to put something before the local council to make sure that this remains an autonomous zone. A city, within a state within a country, where the rules are completely different than for everybody else. Now again, before you think, well, this is just a fringe thing, Paul, you're spending a lot of time talking about a thing in a country we don't live in. Well, who knows what's going to happen when this thing eventually gets voted on in the Seattle Council, because this is the mayor of the Democratic Party, the mainstream left political party in the United States. This is what she says about the people who stole a police station and set up their own city within a state within a country. This is what she says about those people.
How long do you think Seattle and those few blocks looks like this?
I don't know. We could have the summer of love.
Well, tell that to the police, who was supposed to be in that precinct, though. But I understand your sentiment, Mayor.
Oh, jog on. So you see what starts off as the trots on the street that eventually becomes a minority voice in a council or in a parliament. And then because those voices dominate social media, which then, of course, feeds back into the wider narratives of mainstream media, rather than saying, no, you can't build cities within cities, we have one city, that's it. You don't get to decide which police stations stand or fall. Instead, it's the summer of love. And the person who is the brother of a person who runs a state, that being the TV host whose brother runs the state of New York, says, fine, jog on. We've talked a lot about the march through the institutions. This is often written off as some sort of paranoid talk done on talkback radio in the middle of the night. But what you are seeing right now around the world are the lunatics who 10 years ago were on the street, who found a way to get into elected office, who found a way to scare people into more significant elected office. And it's happening here. Remember how many councils in Australia have banned Australia Day? They've even told their employees they're not allowed to use terms like Australia Day. This is despite the fact that 74% of all Australians support Australia Day. But because the trots on the street eventually get somebody into the council, and the council's not going to have a conversation with anyone but the activists, they end up, holus bolus, deciding that the National Day is flushed. Local council is often the training ground for who ends up going into state parliament. State Parliament leads to federal Parliament. So make no mistake, what is happening right now on the fringes of society is being mainstreamed. It's being mainstreamed by much of the media, but most importantly by serious political movements that already have their footholds in places of power. They make their choices based off what the wildest of activists want, and you just have to swallow it. And then, of course, there are the people who desperately want to invent the next outrage, to own for that hit of endorphins, like getting a jackpot of the poker machines, if they're able to work out what the next cultural fight should be. A taxpayer-funded comedian says that coon cheese is a problem because, yes, it is used, that term, as a racial slur against Indigenous Australians. But there's a small problem with the nonsense that he's been serving up. Coon cheese isn't named after anything but this. The brand recognises the work, and this is according to Coon on their website, an American Edward William Coon, who patented a unique ripening process that was used in the manufacture of the original Coon cheese. Now, how facile does this stuff become? Where you read meaning into a name, you then put it out on the internet, and then, of course, the internet gives you what you want. That then gets mainstreamed by a media who is moving on to the next outrage every day, and it feeds into the perpetual bullshit machine. It keeps rolling on.